Okay. Hello and welcome everyone to another episode of Masculinity Unmasked, the fortnightly conversation that delves deep into what it means to be a man in the 21st century. So, the topic for today's episode is the sunken cost fallacy. And as always, I'm joined by my co host and fellow coach, Greg Stein. And today we've also got a very special guest with us, Jeevan Fernando, who is a former doctor, health coach, and research author. And Jivan and myself know each other from doing some associate work together for someone called Simon Tompkins, and that's how we first met. And Jivan and I have often talked about our respective journeys into the coaching world. So Jivan has quite a lot to share in that respect from his journey as a doctor to becoming a coach. So, Jivan, thanks very much for joining us this evening. Do you want to start by sharing a little bit about who you are and how you came into this work?
All right. Thank you very much for having me. So I'm Jeevan. I originally trained as a doctor in the at the University of Cambridge. So I spent a long time studying, how brains work, how the heart works, all of these things. And I was a doctor for a little while. I worked in Oxford, but then I realized that I was really interested in helping people with their health, but not in the way that a doctor would normally do it. And so then I sort of made the jump and became a health coach. And sort of in behind the scenes, whilst I was doing my clinical work, I actually did a lot of research into motivation, addictions, habits, these sorts of things. And that's sort of
Mm.
the thing that I help people with sort of one to one now as a coach. So that's
Mm.
me.
Yeah, it's fascinating, and sort of it's not a it's not a common combination, is it, that we hear of a lot? Sort of a doctor goes into the coaching world. So, might be useful to start for our listeners, sort of explaining what we mean or what our understanding is of sunken cost fallacy, and a little bit more about your story there, if that's okay.
Yes, so the sunk cost fallacy it's sort of a mistake that we commonly make in our decision making. So the sunk cost that we're speaking about is something that happens when we're making a decision about whether to start or end something. It's a matter of it could be in a relationship, it could be a job that you have and you've been doing it for some time and you invest a lot of resources, time, effort, blood, sweat, tears,
Mm.
and when you've invested all that time into a decision that you've made, but now really part of you wants to make a new one. You want to change your path. You want to maybe pursue something else. There's a difficulty in actually following what you truly want to do because you've invested so much time. And so the
Yeah.
fallacy is that we could try and convince ourselves that, oh, because I've invested this much, I should just stick with it. But
Mm.
actually, that's how you get into more and more sadness, more and more lack of fulfillment, more and more dissatisfaction because you tell yourself that because I've done this for 10 years, I need to do this for the rest of my life. Actually, you'd
Yeah.
probably be better off starting again from where you want to be now and you'd actually live a happier life. But it's very difficult to make that decision. And that's the sunk cost
Mm.
fallacy. So, in the context of me, I obviously spent a long time in medical school, a long, long time, a lot of effort, exams, money obviously invested. And so a lot of people will tell you that if you've, spent 10 years or your whole life wanting to be a doctor, then why don't you just keep doing it?
Mm.
But of course, really, you're the one that has to wake up at the end of the day to go and do that job. And if you are not in it, you are living someone else's life, not your own.
Mm.
And so I obviously had to battle the sunk cost fallacy, the fear in my mind about starting a new path. And so, of course, now I have jumped to being a coach and helping people one to one. And you don't know how it's going to work, but you have to sort of take that leap of faith and
Mm.
fight away those fears and then take the leap of faith for the greater good in some sense to for a life that you dream about rather than the one that you have. And so that is something that I myself had to sort of battle and here I am now and I feel much more fulfilled in the work that I do. So
Mhm.
I'm very, very grateful that I was able to sort of overcome that. But it's a very, very common thing that most people sort of don't get permission, they don't give themselves permission to do.
Mhm.
Jeevan, that's so interesting. And one thing we spoke about before we come on is we've all made big changes, obviously, which we'll go into earlier. And for me, I think like it for me, when I made my change and when I speak to other people about change, it's this idea of cognitive dissonance, self-determination theory, where things just don't align and they want to do something a little different, Um, but also, there's big trends with this. I don't know how much you guys are aware of this, but the amount of people that make mid-career spikes or change career direction, related to lots of things. Javan, do you reckon there was any outside influences which made you change your mind, or was it sort of like like an inner feeling, like a gut instinct that you wanted to go down a different route?
I think commonly when we make a decision, we make it based on the information we have before we've actually sort of jumped on the boat. Before we've actually started moving on the journey, we make a certain set of assumptions on what we think that journey is going to be. And so I had an idea of what it would be to be a doctor, what the sort of life would be.
Mhm.
But then as I did it, as I went through medical school and I saw people that were in the place that I was planning to go, I realized that I didn't necessarily want to be in that scenario because of, I guess I felt like I wanted to have more of a hands-on approach helping people and helping people actually before the hospital outside. It's really, in my opinion, it was always about preventing people from even getting to hospital. But I found that, as a doctor, I was treating people sort of too far down the line, too late. And that sort of causes a lot of burnout, a lot of sort of issues with the healthcare system is because actually we're only reaching people too late. And so
Mhm.
I wanted to help people when they're at home. What do you eat at home? What exercise do you do? How are you sleeping? How are you managing your stress? Because if you don't manage those things, then you end up in hospital. But I was like, I'd rather help these people that I'm seeing in the hospital 10 years before so they never have to get there. And so as I saw more of the issues with health, I saw all of these things, I saw what the life was like as a doctor, I realized that it wasn't aligned to my philosophy of health and my what I prioritize in terms of the work that I'd want to do.
Mhm.
And so it was more me getting a harsh reality check of this what the goal I was trying to get actually meant and how it really didn't align with.
Mhm.
Completely
Yeah.
understand you. Um, one question I've got, then I'll hand you over to Max. I think like there's a real something that really interests me is the difference between type A and type B people, if that makes sense. Type A's are your Wolf of Wall Streets, your hustlers, and type B's are generally your coaches. The nice, the people we want to give. Right. When you're talking about that, I'm thinking that everyone's motivated by such different things. Intrinsic, extrinsic. And not one time did you talk about money, or did you talk about anything like that? It was like an intrinsic drive to help people. You know, would you agree with that?
So I think I've had an interesting thought. I guess I've had an interesting journey in my relationship with money, what it is to
Yeah,
what it is and what it is that like let's say we're talking about masculinity unmasked here, and so there is as a man there's an interesting complex relationship that you're supposed to have with money or what we're supposed to do as a man with regards to money. And I've now got to a point where I realize that more doesn't necessarily equal better. And especially as I was thinking about the type of dad I wanted to be down the line.
Mm.
It was that I wanted to be a present dad rather than like a rich dad that just paid for things but wasn't ever there. So
Mm.
in some
Yeah.
sense, it was like, yeah, I could be a like this is the thing. If I, as a coach, you obviously have potential to earn a lot of money, but also, the idea a lot of people have about being a doctor is that, oh yeah, you can earn all this money, you can go and work in
Mm.
private healthcare, this and that, or go to America and charge loads of money for what you do. But at a certain point, you need enough money. But past that, then you need enough time. And
Mm.
I knew that sort of the things that I had seen growing up myself and the people that I was around, I saw that really dads and just male role models were not around enough. They were working really, really hard at very difficult jobs and were never really at home to give the kids a sort of male perspective on things. And so
Yeah.
we sort of a lot of us grew up without a male a male like they were maybe there physically but not actually there psychologically or emotionally.
Mm.
They weren't there to actually give you advice or we didn't really have a relationship with our dads as much. And so at that point I realized that I need to do something that I actually care about because if I am not happy, not satisfied with my life, then that is going to inevitably affect my relationships with my future kids, with my future wife, with everybody. If I'm unsatisfied, that is going to spill out into my relationships.
Mm.
And if I'm constantly driven to a job that I like driven to a job, regardless of the money, I'm not even going to be there for my relationships. And I realized that that is not a good deal because I've seen it made so many times and it does not work out.
Yeah. Such a powerful reminder because, a lot of the guys that I talk to in the coaching space all say that, right? It gets to a point where the monetary value no longer matters. They'd actually pay to have the time back. So time in and of itself is valuable and other things carry value. It's not just money. So that's such an important part of all of this. And especially through that gendered lens, that wounded man box that we all come from, where we're just taught to run on that corporate treadmill at all costs, provide at all costs, not speak about our emotions, not talk about, our actual dreams, maybe that might not align. We talked about alignment. And that can all keep us trapped in this. And that was a big part of my journey as well. So, by way of background, so I went into the barrister side of things. So, I remember being at school at 18 and deciding what I wanted to do. And it's funny that we make these critical decisions at 18 years old when we're basically still kids just turning into adults. And there's an expectation in society that we stick to whatever decision we made after just those 18 years. And that's quite amazing just thinking about that. But that sort of catapulted me into the legal world. And I remember thinking, right, I can either be a solicitor or I can be a barrister. And I went into that world because I wanted to help people, I wanted to advocate for people. But the glitz and the glamour you saw on TV wasn't the reality of the profession. I'm sure you probably saw this with medicine. And I remember just being on trains all the way around the country, shattered constantly, and then coming out of court after cross-examining people, coming home, preparing for another trial. And I just thought, this is like a merry-go-round. And there's a lot of money involved. There is a lot of glitz and identity involved in this. And there's a lot of highs from winning in court, having a good opponent, having a nice judge. But there's also a lot of lows. And this is now a way of life. Do I want this way of life for the rest of my life? And and I'm not digging the bar because it works for a lot of people. But for me, intrinsically who I was, there wasn't enough of an alignment to stay. So then I had to decide, how do I move forward from here? And you talked about that leap of faith. And for me, it was exactly that. And I don't know if you guys remember Indiana Jones, but there's a scene in The Last Crusade, I think it is, where he steps out of a mountain and the bridge isn't there, but the bits of the bridge start to appear as he puts his feet out. And I always explain to people, like, coming away from the sunken cost fallacy is very much like that metaphor because we feel like we're just going to step off and fall down a cliff, but actually the bridge does appear. You just got to put your first foot out, and that's the way that the world works. And you can begin to build in things, and we'll come on to this, I guess, when we talk about how to move forward with this. But from my experience, you can begin to build that bridge even whilst you're in, a role that might not feel aligned. Um, Early on, you can still do things. There's still steps you can take. So we're not talking about jumping off of a cliff, but the bridge will appear. There is something about trust, isn't there, in this process? I don't know if you can relate to that, even in your sort of journey.
Yeah, it's I think this relates to our sort of self-esteem and how we identify with the job that we have done for so long. Because
Mm,
I've spoken to a lot of medics and a lot of people that it's just they only feel confident to do the things that they've done already. And so, we devalue ourselves. We tell ourselves, well, I only know how to do this.
mm,
And so you forget your potential in some sense because you've only really funneled yourself in one particular way.
mm,
But actually, before you did that, you had potential to do everything, and that potential is still there. But we just don't access it as much. And so the faith is also a faith in yourself that we often don't really nourish as much as we should. We don't really show ourselves that we can do other things because we're so much on this sort of hamster wheel of what we've been doing, and we're so wrapped up in the cycle of doing that job and waking up, doing the job, eating, going to sleep. And so we
mm,
forget that we can actually do lots more things. We're interested in so many other things where we're capable of doing so many other things, but we just haven't given ourselves a chance to do it.
mm,
And so we can get confused. We can think that because we haven't done it, it means we can't do it. But those two things are not the same thing. And so I think that it's a very, very common scenario where we feel like I'm only good at what I've done so far. But the only way to get good is to try and take those first steps, right? And that's the only way to get good.
yeah, yeah,
And so yeah, I totally feel that metaphor, and it's a very, very good one because it will never ever feel safe. It will never feel as safe as doing the thing that your parents told you to do since you've been a kid. It's never gonna be as safe as having a contract where you're bounded for the next few years and you get sick pay and you get a pension. Like there isn't the safety net of that, but we are so used to that when we are in our sort of the career that we've been in for so long.
mm,
But there's the trade-off of, is that worth my sanity? And probably not at the end of the day. Can
Yeah.
could I
mm,
could I live with myself if I didn't make this choice? Probably not. You sort of wither away. You sort of die before you die. If you keep making
mm,
those mistakes that aren't in alignment with you. And so, the if we're getting into sort of the remedies to this, it's actually realizing that there is sort of no choice in some sense. Once there is that spark within you, you can either test it, see where it goes, or you can regret it for years when you don't do it. And really, there's kind of only one. There's only one way of not regretting that on your deathbed. You know what I mean?
mm.
I completely hear you. Yeah, a really interesting chat, guys. And like I said, I could talk about this all night. One term that Max brought up on the show before we even come on tonight, something I've never even heard of before, was golden handcuffs. And one thing that as it's my birthday this week, guys, I'm 38 and realize that we're all at slightly different ages. I think things are changing, very much so. Like when I was your age, Jeevan, and I think COVID changed a lot of people's thoughts and mindsets. And we're in a real changing um, landscape for this. I remember when I was diving into to all the stats for quiet quitting. it's like 40% of men want to work for themselves. This is in line with what you're talking about, isn't it? Like intrinsic values, what it is that you want for yourself. Just fascinating stuff. I'm interested to see where this goes for the future and future generations as well, because we live in a world where there are so many more opportunities. We don't just have to be pigeonholed to one thing.
Mm.
I think that's what we've found, isn't it, guys? Is a collective. You sign up to be a lawyer, a teacher. That's not necessarily where your career is going to take you. But it's really interesting now, and I don't mind, I'll just be completely honest. My career change was all motivated about progression and money. And the first one, I was living in the city. I was flat out broke as a teacher. I'm not scared to admit it. And I needed more money. All right. And I dived into some economic fight or flight, survival stress response thing where I needed more. All right. As I got older and I got married, my priorities changed a lot. So I think that like that feeling that you've got as well, this like intrinsic value of this is what I want to do, this is how I see myself, that also changes. I think that's an interesting point as well. That this is I'd be really interested to know how many people stay in careers or on this sort of journey for, if that makes sense. Well, I think that ebbs and flows, but it's a fascinating story. I think the real message and take home that I'll give to my clients, and me and Max are quite thoughtfulness. The people who listen, we want them to learn, want them to take stuff home. There's nothing wrong with change. There's nothing wrong with chasing your dreams. It's almost, take the risk. And if you don't take the risk, you'll probably regret it. And that's what I picked up through both things that you guys were saying there, is you noticed something wrong, you noticed something that wasn't aligning, something wasn't right, and you did something about it, and it worked. So,
Mm.
and I think everyone's nervous about making that change, aren't they? But actually, we do have this fight or flight, this survival instinct as well, where we do that kicks in as well, where there's a difference between like a want and a need, type A and type B people, where you have to make this work as well. It's just a fascinating story, Jeevan. I know that you left that, kickstart something else. But I think that's a great story for everyone. Is if you're not enjoying what you're doing, there are other opportunities. You can live a life that you're comfortable with. Would you agree with that, guys?
Yeah, and I think especially with what Max said as well is that actually there's a smart way of doing it. There's a smart way of upskilling sort of once you realize that you aren't aligned with where you currently are, there is there is a period of time where you can we reap the rewards of the sort of safe scenario that you're in, but you have
Mm.
to do a bit, those couple hours in the evenings or the weekends to upskill and to build, the first few steps, the first few sort of rungs on the ladder
Yeah.
towards the next sort of the route that you actually want to be on. And so it's not that you up and quit without a plan. There is
Mm.
a smart way of transitioning, but you have to pay attention to who you are on the inside. And as you
Yeah.
said, as your priorities change, you need to pay attention to that, but then take strategic steps to execute to get that plan and then live a life that is more aligned with you.
Mm.
It shouldn't be an emotional decision that you just make um like you make without logic. It should be an integrated decision with both emotions and logic. And
Yeah.
so I think, as you said, you change, your priorities change. What served you in your 20s may not serve you in your 30s, may not serve you in your 40s or 50s or 60s, 70s, 80s, right? Like your priorities have to change and they will change. And so really I think a lot of this, the underlying theme is to stay in communication with yourself. Do
Mm.
not suppress your emotions, your thoughts, your feelings. Listen to them, figure out what they mean, and then make a plan to execute.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so important. Um, it's so easy to do that, isn't it? To push it down, right? When we've got all these other things in, like I've spent so long qualifying, I've put in all this money, I've got golden handcuffs. It might be I've got a new car, or I've got to pay off for my kids in private school, whatever it is. All these things weighing you down, the logic of it can keep you trapped. But actually leaning into that feeling of no, I do need to change. And I think that's where coaching can be really helpful here, because there's often a lot of limiting beliefs and assumptions that can keep us trapped, especially in this area. And by being able to work through those things, those fears, but also some of these topics that we've talked about, like the enmeshment to the role. I know I had that. This is my identity. This is what I've built. This is what people know me as. Or, financially, how can I go from here? And unpacking all of that, because actually underneath all those layers is freedom. And for me, I thought, right, from a barrister, where do I go? What I actually thought I'm unqualifiable, right, from there, because it's just such a unique profession. I was like, that's the only role that I could ever have. And actually, a lot of barristers do think that, speaking to them, which is really interesting. What I missed is the point you said earlier, Jeevan, about transferability. I had a host of skills that were transferable, which I now use and I leverage on, and that's great. And I couldn't be doing what I'm doing now without some of those skills and the way that I do it. But also opened up this idea that I was presented with a binary when I was growing up. I'm either a solicitor or a barrister, that I could be a teacher, I could be a coach, I could go and work in-house, I could be a consultant, I could be self-employed, I could set up my own law firm. There's a million opportunities that I'd never considered because I was fed this message. And that message was very trapping. And it kept me trapped for quite a long time. And I almost learnt the hard way, where I sort of came out of my nest and I was like, wow, there's this bigger world around me. And it was quite terrifying at the time. And I kind of wish I'd had a coach there to be able to support me through that journey. But I did almost another hop. I went into teaching and then I went into the coaching. But I learned my lesson, because when I jumped from the teaching to the coaching, I knew to feel the fear and do it anyway. I knew to lean into discomfort, and I knew that those bits of that bridge would appear, and they did. And I jumped from full time into the freelance work. Um, so all of this is possible for everyone. We're not unique, but I think it really, really goes back to your point, Jivan, that that you can be doing a lot of the leg work whilst you're still in that career. But checking in with yourself is really important, and getting real honesty around what it is that you want, and unpacking that, to sort of chart the course going forwards. Any final thoughts from you both in terms of takeaways for our listeners today on this topic?
Yeah, from me personally, I just want to say that, guys, thank you for your stories. I think it's really brave for guys to almost come on and be vulnerable, if you like, and openly talk. But this is what this is all about, Max, isn't it?
Mm,
We're here to help.
yeah,
And Japan,
exactly.
I thought your story was really, really inspiring, and it will definitely help others that are going through a tricky spot, and need inspiration. So, a real personal thank you to me. Where can people reach you? Where can they find you to look for this advice or to find out more about your story?
So LinkedIn is probably the best place. I'm sorry if you are hearing many files, but LinkedIn is the best place to find me. It's Dr. Jeevan Fernando. You can find me there. That's if you, I have limited places for coaching, but if people are looking for that, then they can message me. But also, I'll be posting about lots of different things. So
Mm,
stay tuned then.
yeah, great stuff.
Fantastic.
Thank you very much. For that, Jivan, and just sharing your story. And I know that's going to be very useful for a lot of people. And thanks for your insights as well, Greg, on the topic. As always, it's been great. And yeah, I just love how we can just get stuck in, with all of this, and I think it is incredibly important. So, if anyone does resonate with any of these topics, please feel free to reach out. We always love to hear from you, or if you have any ideas for topics in the future, that's always useful, as well. Our next conversation will be on the 16th of February with psychotherapist Helen Holmes, and we'll be talking about anxiety and depression. But until then, we wish you all the very best. So thank you very much, everyone. Cheers.
Bye bye.
Cheers.